Okay, good evening, everyone. How are you? Good to see you. Thanks for coming out tonight. So I know many of you have reached out to us and have had some questions or concerns about the project. So tonight is an opportunity to hear about where we are right now in our planning project. We have taken some of your considerations that you are concerns that you've expressed and made some modifications to the plan. So we're going to talk a little bit about that tonight, as well as give an opportunity for everyone to express their pros, their cons, their opinions, and therefore. So we're going to ask that, this is our agenda tonight. We're going to start with some quick introductions, talk about just some agreements for the meeting, about the demonstration about the forest, talk about the forestry, the overview of the project, and we want to have about an hour for Q&A so everyone has an opportunity to speak. I'm going to ask you if you could keep it to about 3 minutes, and then if we have an opportunity to circle back, we certainly will try to do that. So I want everybody to really have the opportunity to talk tonight. So if you could be just courteous, if you have a topic you want to talk about, and then we'll go to the next person and come back to you. And if for some reason I miss you, don't be afraid to wave at me, okay? So I said most of this. So we're going to ask everyone to be curious, open, and respectful. We do have mics at either end. We can take them off the mic rack and you can just circulate it if that's easier. We're going to ask you to have your name and address just so we have it for the record, and try to keep to the 3 minutes. And for the most part, if you have a question, don't hesitate to ask. And we're hoping we're going to wrap up by 7:30, okay? So I'm going to kind of mediate the presentation, but I'll introduce you to the team. We have Andrew from Mass Audubon, Josh from Mass Audubon. Let's see. We have Lisa Hayden from the Woodlands Partnership, Caitlin Conlin from Woodlands Partnership, and Dick Crane from Woodlands Partnership. Thank you for joining us, as well as Gary Goldrup from the New England Forestry Consultants. And from my team, we have Tim Lascarbo, who many of you may know, our Commissioner of Public Services, as well as Maria Kozik, my Administrative Officer. I'm Jennifer Maxey. I'm the Mayor of the City of North Adams, for people who don't know me. But again, thank you for joining us. And we'll get started. So we're going to start with Lisa, I believe.
So I can stand there, right?
Yep.
That'll work.
There you go.
Thank you.
And I'm going to just dim one row of lights. This is being recorded for the television station. So when you talk, you have to talk into the mic so it would come across the broadcast. And if you want to spread out and you want to sit in the gallery so you have a little more room, you're welcome to do that. Okay?
Okay. Thank you, Mayor Maxey. Yeah.
That was the wrong way. That was with the lights on.
There we go.
Better?
That's good.
Is that
That's good for me. All right. Well, good evening, everyone. Thank you for coming, and thank you for your. Sure, I will try to do that. I'll try to speak into the mic too. So thank you for coming and for your genuine concern for the forests in your community. I can sense that that's genuine. My name is Lisa Hayden. I work in outreach at New England Forestry Foundation, and I'm speaking tonight in my role as administrative agent for the Woodlands Partnership of Northwest Massachusetts. And I've been doing that work since 2021. So we're here to talk about the Climate Smart Forestry demonstration here at Notch Reservoir in the city. And there are several opportunities for the city and the region from embarking on this project. And they're listed here on the screen. Promoting climate adaptation at this important watershed, enhancing diverse wildlife habitat, and helping the forest's ability to cope with climate change, which we're really beginning to see and experience in many ways now. Demonstrating optimal management practices and best practices, and applying the latest science in order to improve the fields of forestry and conservation, and offering a lot of educational opportunities. And so the reason I'm here again is through the Woodlands Partnership, we've received a number of grants to help support this work. Okay, so I just want to give a little background about the Woodlands Partnership if you're not familiar. It was created in 2018 state law through grassroots efforts from all the communities in this region, along with the Commonwealth of Massachusetts and the U.S. Forest Service. We have a 36-member board that includes a representative from each of the member towns. So far, 20 have opted in to participate in the partnership. The members also include land trusts, regional planning agencies, watershed groups, community development corporations, and economic development groups, including Lever Incorporated here in the city of North Adams. And so we've been working together on a three-pronged mission, which includes increasing forest land conservation and stewardship to support these intact forest ecosystems that are such an important part of the landscape here. So addressing climate change, both adaptation and mitigation, supporting and increasing natural resource-based economic development for these rural communities, and also promoting the fiscal stability of the towns in this area. And so that is our overall mission. And now I just want to say that I think the city of North Adams should really be applauded for taking the initiative to work with us on the grants that we've received to do some of this planning. It's an opportunity to incorporate planning to understand how climate change is going to affect the care and stewardship of its watershed lands. And so when it became aware of the grant opportunity that we had for a limited number of municipalities, the city's leader accepted the grant and agreed to work with us on comprehensive planning for Notch Reservoir. Okay, so what is a demonstration forest? I wanted to touch on this because it seemed in some of the information that I'd seen shared, there are some misconceptions about what we mean when we're talking about a demonstration forest here. We're definitely not talking about an industrial or production type forest. That is not the city's goal and not what the Woodlands Partnership has intended when we are using this term. The partnership has had a goal to support creating demonstration forest sites throughout the region over the many years of its formation over the past decade. And the vision there was to have town-owned forests where residents and visitors can come to learn how forests are changing with the climate, to learn about how sustainable and climate-smart practices can be applied to address a variety of specific forest health threats and vulnerabilities, and to be able to observe how the forest responds over time as these practices are implemented. And so demonstration sites are places in the real world, whether they be on public or private land, where science is applied. And it's an opportunity for academic research principles from the literature to be implemented to address conditions in our forests, and to monitor those practices for their effectiveness and share that information for the educational benefit of the community at large. So the conversations that we're having here tonight are actually part of the goals of a demonstration forest to help people understand what can be complicated forest dynamics and the range of tools that are available to help promote health and resilience of our forests. Okay, so beyond the specific conditions in the Notch Reservoir forest that we're going to get into more detail about soon here this evening, I wanted to touch a little bit on the Woodlands Partnership and our conservation partners and the broader work that we're doing to address climate change. And we need to be thinking about threats to all of our forests in this region and beyond, trying to continue providing for nature's needs, as well as all of the things that people demand of the world's forests. So you may ask, why are conservation organizations like the Nature Conservancy and Mass Audubon and my group, New England Forestry Foundation, working together in this area? It's because we realize that working forests and sustainable, climate-smart, and ecologically focused forestry are an essential part of natural climate solutions. So you might be asking yourself too, why not just leave forests alone, hands off, let nature take care of itself? And the problem is that nature is under a lot of stress that we humans have put in motion. And we know that when we set aside one area from timber harvesting, it actually makes no difference to climate change and may make it worse. And there are some reasons why. So thinking on a global scale, the demand for wood products is rising, and we all use wood. I'm guessing that you also use toilet paper. Many of our online orders arrive in cardboard boxes when they don't show up in plastic, maybe. And you may be walking on hardwood floors at your home, and I know I am at my home. So we need to be conscious of our consumption as well. And I do want to be clear that, using wood is not a bad thing. We really should be trying to avoid the use of so much plastic, steel, and concrete in our modern society. It takes enormous amounts of energy to produce these materials. And when wood is turned into long-lived products, that carbon remains locked up and stored for many decades or a century or more and can actually substitute for some of these higher emissions materials. So global population is now at 8 billion people, and if we care about sustainability, as I think many of us here tonight do, we also need to be thinking about how we can meet the needs for these people for healthy places to live. So if we're building all of those homes from steel and concrete, this is going to cause enormous emissions that is going to continue to fuel climate change. So we should be looking at shifting to more of a bioeconomy and using more renewable materials such as wood. Okay, and so that does raise the question, where does our wood come from? Currently, I think the latest statistic is that Massachusetts imports about 93% of the wood that we use in this state. So it raises the question for me, shouldn't we be doing some more to to harvest locally part of the wood that we use? And of course, some wood is being imported from other places around the world, other parts of the U.S. Our New England forests can respond very well to thoughtful management, but some other forests around the world can release large amounts of carbon and, of course, are very sensitive and important globally to protect. So there are scientific studies supporting this approach. Here's a headline from some recent research that came out in 2022. And then the IPCC, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, in one of their reports in 2019, summarizes the optimal role that forests can play in terms of atmospheric greenhouse gases. And I'll just read this since it's a little small there. But it says, in the long term, a sustainable forest management strategy aimed at maintaining or increasing forest carbon stocks while producing an annual sustained yield of timber, fiber, or energy from the forest will generate the largest sustained mitigation benefit. So this is the approach that our organizations have been following. And just to wrap up here, the other point is not just climate mitigation, but of course adaptation, which is a lot of the focus that we'll be talking about, I think, tonight. Our forests are vulnerable to climate change, and the carbon that they are storing now is not necessarily guaranteed into the future. Many of our forests are stressed by pest disease and increasingly extreme weather, flooding and droughts, et cetera. And so active and adaptive management really is an important tool for both public and private lands to have available. So thank you very much, and I'll leave it there and turn it over to Andrew.
Hi everyone, I'm Andrew Randazzo. I'm a forest ecologist with Mass Audubon. I focus on forest and climate change. I studied it in both my undergraduate education as well as my master's education, and I've been working in the field for 10 years at this point. I've come a long way in terms of thinking about the complexities of our forests. I think what Lisa offered was this global perspective to be thinking about, but probably you all are wondering a little bit more about what it means for Notch Reservoir, right? Our forest here. I want to start with a little bit of context about our forests, about climate change, and about what is climate-smart forestry and how we've applied it at the site. And then I'll turn it over to Gary Goldrup, the city's forester, who's thought about these things very intentionally at Notch Reservoir. I think there have been a number of there's been a lot of disinformation about the project, and it's my hope that folks can learn from this presentation and ask questions today to help clarify what is and what is not happening. And I'll work to talk about that here. One of the points that I want to start off with is the idea that Notch Reservoir is old growth forest. Notch Reservoir it has followed a similar history in Massachusetts, as much of many of the forests in Massachusetts, and is not an old growth forest. We know that indigenous peoples were in the region shaping the forest and managing it for their communities and for future generations. We know that European colonization led to widespread land clearing and the creation of more uniform forests, including at Notch Reservoir. We know that agricultural abandonment was often followed by intensive harvests that were focused on timber income. And what that has left us with is relatively uniform forests, such as the forests that are within Notch Reservoir, that are not as resilient to the impacts that we see today. Impacts like invasive species, impact like overabundant deer population, impacts like climate change. And so one of the opportunities that we have are to think more intentionally about where we care for forests, how we care for forests, and how we respond to the impacts of these past land uses. So the reality is that climate change is impacting forests now. Forests can be part of the climate change solution, and forest stewardship can help forests to adapt to climate change as well as existing forest health threats. And all these things are true and should be considered together. We're seeing a great deal of impact on our forests from climate change. We're seeing at Notch Reservoir a whole number of forest pests and pathogens that are impacting the stands in which this plan is proposing to engage in a variety of management practices. That is coupled with the risk of more intense disturbances and storms on a more frequent basis. So it's something for us to be thinking about intentionally as we look to steward the watershed at Notch Reservoir. Again, forests are the solution to climate change. Trees lock away carbon dioxide from the atmosphere in the form of carbon within their biomass. So we think about this through carbon sequestration, the idea that trees are actually soaking up carbon from the atmosphere. And that is best done by young trees. We think about it as well in carbon storage. Mature trees, as trees get older, they store and lock away more carbon. And in this bottom graph, you can see that interaction as the forest ages. One of the things to consider is that forests are dynamic systems. There's no one single optimal state of a forest. So we have to think about diversity across scales and how we make sure that diversity is occurring, including at the site level at Notch Reservoir. Climate smart forestry thinks about these things through the lens of the many goals that we have for our forests: recreation, water quality, wildlife, timber, and of course, the idea of dealing with climate change. Climate smart forestry brings in this lens of mitigation, which considers intentionally that sequestration and storage dynamic and how we can optimize it by either managing passively or managing actively in areas of high vulnerability. We also have to consider this idea of adaptation in association with climate smart forestry. So the reality is that climate change is unfolding at a rapid pace, and we have all these other impacts that I've alluded to in the earlier slide that are preventing our forests from bouncing back in the same way or being more resilient. So resilience is often a thing that we talk about in relationship to our forests. How can we think about what areas of the forest are vulnerable and make them more resilient while considering all of the goals we have for our forests? But what does climate smart forestry look like? It starts with this forest stewardship climate plan that Notch Reservoir got in 2022. The points I really want to pull out here is this assessing climate vulnerabilities, especially in association with all of the other dynamics that are going on in this forest, right? And so that is a really important part of this planning effort. These are 10-year stewardship planning documents that are designed to think about the sustainability of the forest long term. And then we select specific management practices that address those vulnerabilities in a given area. They might be passive management or they might be active management depending on what the circumstance is. Broadly speaking, climate smart forestry practices fall under these categories. I want to point to the documents here, many of which are here today. All of those pull out the research behind these practices and how these practices balance this idea of adaptation and mitigation in our forests while working within the goals that the community has for their woods. But why climate smart forestry? Why not just leave things alone? The idea is that we can actually intervene with climate smart strategies in order to change the trajectory of the forest. Up here is a picture from Elm Hill, a Mass Audubon sanctuary. This is a stand or an area of forest where emerald ash borer, an invasive boring insect, came in and wiped out that ash stand. What moved in was an understory of invasive species that prevented native plant establishment and led to the formation of a relative monoculture in the area. Something similar has unfolded in Stand 3A and along Bellows Pipe Trail at Notch Reservoir. Those areas, this area of Stand 3A, many sections of them were former Norway spruce plantations. They were planted by humans. They were dense monocultures. They weren't healthy. They declined. Invasive species moved in. One of the opportunities we have here is to mechanically control these invasive species and put this Stand 3A on a better trajectory where it can grow a diversity of native plants. And that's one of the management recommendations that we'll be adopting. We won't be using herbicides in this area or on any area within Notch Reservoir. This will be done through mechanical control. In Stand 3A, the only action that will happen there is the control of invasive species because that really is the primary vulnerability of that stand. I'm going to pull up a better map of this later when Gary talks, and he'll talk about the specific practices. But one thing I want to point out is that this map has been updated, and the impact and the footprint of the stands has been, of the harvested areas and the invasive species, well, actually, the Stand 3A is the same, but of the harvest areas, has been slightly scaled back. And Gary will talk about that a little bit. But what we're talking about is forest stewardship across approximately 70 acres of 1,073 acres. I want to point to the idea of the city's primary goals for Notch Reservoir, which include recreation, wildlife, water quality, addressing invasive species, and climate resilience and carbon storage. I'm going to walk us sort of through how what Gary has put together into his plan helps to meet these goals. A key consideration of this forest stewardship climate plan really was climate resilience. And I've pulled out for each of these stands the primary vulnerability. There's many vulnerabilities for each of the stands. But in Stand 1, this area where we'll be doing single tree and group selection, which Gary will talk to you a little bit more about, the key impact is emerald ash borer. And in fact, over the past 2 years, we've seen a drastic evolution of the emerald ash borer and its impact on ash in that stand, to the point where 2 years ago, we had little to no mortality, and to today, we have about 40% mortality of that ash. This single tree and group selection will work to take out some of that dead and dying ash and lock it away into long-term wood products that could be used locally. And that locks away carbon while we're growing new trees. And that will also make sure that we're diversifying the structure and condition of the stand so that we don't have a similar outcome to what I talked about at Elm Hill. The pine plantations, these are, again, these monocultures that were planted by humans. They haven't been tended, and they're now dying and declining. They're suffering from a number of diseases, they're overstocked, and they're on their way out. So we're engaging in these transition harvests, which are more intensive harvests that are designed to shift the trajectory of those stands, right? They're designed to, in particular, introduce a greater element of oak hickory, which is a climate adaptive species, and to enrich that biodiversity in those stands. And so we'll not only engage in the harvest, but we'll engage in enrichment planting. So planting in the understory with tree protection of those climate adapted species from locally sourced seeds. And we'll engage in invasive species control across the property. I'll talk a little bit more about that, but I also just want to point to the opportunity of this demonstration forest is for there to be long-term monitoring of this site. Mass Audubon has gone out to the site to collect data across the area, both within the managed areas as well as control areas that are similar to those managed areas, so that we can document over time how change is unfolding and how the practices are working. Carbon storage is definitely a part of what was planned here. And so one of the things I want to point out is that the stewardship plan calls for the setting aside of 267 acres in stands 5 through 9 as forest reserves, and has a stewardship footprint like I mentioned, of 70 acres out of 1,073. There are other management practices in the stewardship plan that the city has not decided to adopt, and there are also a big majority of the area where passive management has been decided as the best strategy. And so I also want to point out to that idea of transition harvest offering carbon benefit. These are dying and declining pine plantations. They're losing carbon, and we can engage in specific strategies to change that trajectory. And we'll expedite that process by engaging in that enrichment planting. And then, of course, I mentioned the wood products dynamics. I've already sort of talked about this invasive species piece, and I want to be mindful of time so that you all can have your questions answered. But I want to emphasize that I recognize that it was upsetting for many of you all to hear about the use of herbicides. It was always our intention to work alongside the Conservation Commission, and the Conservation Commission has asked that the city move to mechanical treatment. The city has made that decision, and no herbicides will be used at Notch Reservoir. I also just want to point out that mechanical control takes repeated interventions. And so we will engage, as a demonstration site, this project team is really committed to the long-term stewardship of this site. That does not mean perpetual harvest, but a good example might be coming back and following up with invasive species for several years to come, in addition to engaging in that long-term monitoring. One of the points that I want to talk about is that those more intensive transition harvests, the patch clear cut and the shelter wood, are actually in a great place for fledgling birds. Notch Reservoir is connected to a large body of maturing forests that bird species that depend on maturing forests for their breeding period of their life will benefit from, because their young depend on patches of young forests that are nearby those mature areas in order for them to fledge. And that's because that shrubbiness, that weedy understory actually helps to protect those species from predation in a time of their life when they're vulnerable. I want to make it clear that Bellows Pipe Trail will not be closed for a year to forever. That is inaccurate. The trail will be closed for short periods of time in the winter. The exact duration depends on the condition, but we're talking on the scale of days to weeks at a time, not a year. And the ultimate goal here is that as part of the city's care of the site, we'll work to enhance the Bellows Pipe Trail. And one of the key things to think about is that Gary will be working very closely with the operators on the site to make sure that the project is closed out in a way that brings that trail to a better condition, that grades it, that replaces culverts that are causing erosion alongside the trail, and that help to actually improve the recreational experience from that perspective. I do want to acknowledge that a harvest absolutely impacts your recreational experience from an aesthetics perspective, right? It will change your recreational experience. One of the things that I like to think about that from is ultimately of 1,073 acres, we're saying that 70 acres is in the most need of care, and we're ultimately caring for that forest for future generations to enjoy, and that feels significant to me. Water quality is certainly important given Notch Reservoir. One of the ideas here is that we're using small-scale natural disturbances, mimicking natural disturbances with harvest at this smaller scale. As we prepare for climate change to bring more intensive disturbances, which we've already seen, engaging in those targeted harvests in the most vulnerable areas can reduce the risk of a big disturbance having an impact that causes a large pulse of woody debris and sedimentation into the reservoir. We'll use climate-informed best management practices that assure that the site is protected, and I'm sure Gary will mention that. And I've talked about the culvert upgrades, which the city has talked about as needed for the maintenance of the reservoir. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Gary, and I'll pull up a map for him so that he can walk you through.
It's our time. Yep, no, I have no problem with that. Gary, how long will you be?
Brief, because I think Andrew just about covered it.
Yep, so I'll give you the extra 10 minutes.
Sorry.
Okay,
Is that okay?
okay. We all set?
Yes, is that I can zoom out a little here.
Good evening. Glad to be here. My name's Gary Gouldrup. I'm a licensed forester in Massachusetts, been practicing forestry in the Commonwealth since 1990. The New England Forestry Consultants, we have offices throughout New England and currently employ over 20 foresters in New England. Let me try to give you a background of my involvement and relationship with both Mass Audubon, New England Forestry Foundation, and the City of North Adams. I was given an opportunity to bid on the climate plan that would be prepared through the Woodlands Partnership. And as we looked at the bid prospectus, we felt this was very important as a private consulting firm to get involved with. Forestry is changing in Massachusetts, and we wanted to be a leader in the changes that we saw coming as a consulting firm. So we submitted our bid, and we were awarded the preparation of this forest management plan for the Notch Reservoir. Several things had to happen before we actually got involved with the project. We had to be trained. So I am a trained climate preparer. We went through a program that addressed all of the forest impacts through climate change and received our training so that we could prepare the plan based on the requirements that would be needed to incorporate into the forest management plan. Then we conducted, my next step was to meet with the city because they're our client. And it's very important that we sit down. I sat down with Tim Lascarbo and we talked about what were the goals for the property. And obviously, number one goal was water quality. And that was a high consideration in developing the plan. Recreation, obviously, very important. And just habitat for wildlife. After we identified goals and objectives, we did an inventory of the property, collected data that will be used in long-term management, monitoring, to see how the forest responds to the changes that the climate is going to bring upon our woodlands. The next step, after we prepared the plan, we submitted a draft, and then we had public education. This is my fourth presentation on the project. We met here, we presented the plan, then we submitted it to Department of Conservation and Recreation, approved the plan, and now we went into an education process where we had a public meeting here at Town Hall. We had a site walk that addressed the forest management plan, and the next step was implementation. So now we're at the implementation part of the plan, where what we have done is actually mark the trees based on the recommendations in the plan. We've had a site walk to look at the trees that were marked. All of the trees that are selected to be harvested have been marked with paint. So now the next step would be to submit a cutting plan to the state forester. Following the approval of the forest cutting plan, it would then, the timber that is going to be sold would go out to bid, and we would send out prospectus for bids on timber. The harvest, it's very unique in that there are several management practices that are quite different. They're not all the same. If you look at the map, on the western side of Bellows Trail, you're going to see a northern hardwood stand. That's the green aqua hash marks. This is the northern hardwood sites where you have ash, sugar maple, components of red oak, beech, hemlock, that were initially scheduled for a selection harvest. Over the last 2 years, when we got back in there, we started to see how dramatically the white ash component has declined because of the emerald ash borer. So it really became a selection harvest with salvage, harvesting ash trees that have died and or are on the way out due to the infestations that are in that stand at this time. So it's actually good timing in terms of being able to recover the losses. Ash in particular has a short shelf life. When it dies, its wood properties start to decline a lot quicker than, for example, oak wood after a gypsy moth infestation. So the timing, I believe, is excellent in terms of being able to salvage that product. Then you're going to also see the red pine plantations. That's going to be the stand type 2 to the northeast, and then further down to the southeast. These were plantations of red pine, and those red pine and spruce that are in those plantations are deteriorating and starting to blow down. And the recommendation was to do what we're going to call a patch cut with reserves, harvesting the red pine, the spruce, leaving whatever hardwood we can. Hickory in particular, sugar maple, and the red oak would be retained as a seed source. Within those stands, we have also made recommendations for forest enrichment plantings. We're looking at planting oak, hickory in particular. They're going to require some fencing, protect them from deer, browse, etc. But that's part of the transition of these forests that are in decline, is that we're replacing them with a species that is going to be very resilient over time and into the future. So it's the removal, a short-term loss of carbon with the expectation of a long-term gain by replacing what's been lost with species that will be able to regenerate and be better suited to a warmer climate. And then the shelterwood stands, the white pine stand, it's the ST4 and the kind of, yeah, there you go, right there. Those are also plantations that were never managed. They're quite dominant, mature. Site index very high. They grow very well in that particular site. These soils are very, very rich, and trees are very tall. But as we went on our site walk, for those who went with me, you could see the decline because of the lack of management and the very limited regeneration in the understory. So it's an opportunity to harvest trees, open up the understory, and replace them with resilient species. Part of the climate change initiative here for forest best management practices, that's one of the things that's, we're going to use a lot of wood mats on stream crossings. Everything is going to be bridged when you have a stream crossing to protect the resource. Water bars may not just be used as dirt berms, but we may actually implement using wood debris to stabilize the site even greater. So the whole purpose is to go above and beyond the typical forest management practices that have been done in the past. I think the biggest part of making this project a success is the timing. We're not guaranteed a frozen winter. We're not guaranteed a dry summer anymore. When we go to put out the project to bid, it'll be clearly stated how the weather will impact this harvest. That operators will have to stop when conditions aren't conducive to harvesting. And that may have a big impact on their bid. If they have to be jumping back and forth, it's a cost to them. So oversight on this particular project will be clearly defined in the bid prospectus when we put this out. And I think that's extremely important on a site where you have steep slopes, you have heavy soils, and you have a watershed, public watershed supply. So
I'm going to give you one more minute to wrap it up.
I'm done.
Okay.
I'm done. So I appreciate your time. And if you have any questions, I'd be glad to answer later. Thank you.
Andrew, do you? Okay. Deb, do you want to start? You're welcome.
So my name is Deb Raber. I live at 281 Notch Road, so it's just below the Woodlawn Split, and I have a nice little video if you'd like to see to back up what I'm about to say. So previous logging practices and private property have turned Notch Road into a river every time it rains, flooding private driveways, and I know basements down the street from me. Tim's crew has to come up with their payloaders and clean off the road multiple times. The sewers also have to be cleaned out as well. Has there been any study or consideration in rain patterns and potential damage to public roads and private property? Because I also have neighbors whose bottoms of their driveways have to be patched often because of the runoff that's happened. So soil erosion, and then the effect on our water supply, and then the downstream repair and the cost to the city. And then the other question I have for you is, when's the next Conservation Commission meeting? And if anyone would like to see the video, the mayor also has it on her email, and I'd be more than happy to share with anyone who would like to see the runoff that occurs in front of my house and in through my driveway and takes out sections of my driveway and my neighbors. I'm more than happy to share that.
So, William, do you know when the next Conservation Commission meeting is?
No, currently, due to quorum issues, I'm having a lot of trouble trying to get all 4 members, because it's a 7-person board, but we have 3 vacancies. It means it's every member or it's not. And
So, Deb, we can let you know when that next meeting is.
Yes,
planned.
please,
We
please
can't
do.
proceed without that happening.
Sure. And then the other question, my last one, because I think I have like 1 minute left, is the representation from the residents of North Adams, the residents of Williamstown, and the residents of Adams, since this backs Adams, and then the residents of Williamstown, because logging trucks going up Loose Road and going up my road past my house is very concerning.
Can someone answer Deb's question about the erosion and runoff and things like that? Her first part of her.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, we have not done a hydrological assessment, if that's what you're asking. But you know, one of the things the reasons that Gary is on this project is because he has decades of experience working on well-managed logging jobs. And the reality is that not every harvest is done well. This harvest will be done well. And the key to as Gary spoke to, the key to ensuring that impact is mitigated is the timing of the harvest. And that will, as Gary mentioned, be within the bid prospectus prospectus for this job, folks will have strict requirements about what they can and cannot do. The addition of water bars, and at the end of the job, the closeout, the improvement of the culverts will prevent any sort of scenario like the one you referenced.
Get all that in writing?
It's recorded.
How long is this going to take? Because I'm also looking at, this is my house. This is the investment I made in North Adams. This is my house. Okay? This is my house. And I have neighbors whose basements are flooded from stuff like this. Right below Brickyard Court. There's a raised ranch that has to have sandbags in their driveway because of this. And Tim can attest to it because his crew
I
works
can attest
so
to it.
darn hard to clear that road every single
I can
time.
agree with you 100% on that. That is because of a private landowner that stripped the
Yep.
whole property up there. This is what I'm trying to avoid when we started this plan. We want to do it right.
So Deb, we can talk more about the immediate issue with you. Would anyone else, if you want to just pass the mic, Deb, if you don't, so people don't have to
Do
get
that.
up.
And my apologies that I have to step out.
Thanks, Deb.
My name is Diane Olson. I live at 307 East Main Street. My question is about the interval between removing the invasive species or the dead or dying trees and the replacement with new stock. How long is that going to be? And if it's during another wet July, how are you going to prevent erosion of the soil?
Good question. Well, no harvest activity will be done during a wet period, right? So that's that. In terms of the invasive species treatment, the shift to mechanical has changed our timeline slightly. But the reality is that when you do a mechanical treatment, you're talking about a routine investment for several years coming in to manage those invasives. The reality of this is, I think that's a good thing. The idea of a stand 3A in particular is sort of the loss of a forest, and there's an opportunity to restore that condition. And so that will be done in spring, and it will have some impact on the soils because you're pulling roots out of soils. But it will be done cautiously and carefully with using professionals that work with Gary at NEFCO. And so the harvest, may take place this winter if the conditions are right. That invasive species treatment will happen this spring and for several years to come. And then the enrichment planting, one of the things that we've heard from people in the comments is the desire for the seedlings to be sourced from local stock. The other option is to think about how can you bring species genetic material from areas that are better adapted to climate change in order to influence that resilience and introduce more genetic diversity. But we've heard from folks that that's not the preferred path, and we'll source the seedlings locally, it seems, and that means that we'll be growing them out over the next 2 years. So that would be we'll start growing them now, and then we'll plant them in fall of 2025.
So the
So I guess that's the-
smallest seedlings will be 1.5 to 2 years old?
Yes, but they'll be grown in nursery conditions, and so
understand.
at what?
I understand.
Yeah, and they'll be protected, right? And so we'll use tree tubes to protect them, so that they can get established in effectively in order to outcompete surrounding vegetation and prevent herbivory as well.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
thanks very much for the opportunity to speak with you tonight and to ask questions. I'm Stuart Burns. I live at 48 Holbrook Street in North Adams, and very concerned about the logging plan, and a lot of things that you said sound good on the surface, but if you probe a little more deeply, they don't sound so good. I may have misunderstood what Lisa was saying at the beginning, but it sounded like she was saying that because we have some trees here, that just like we have, this is an agricultural area, so we have a lot of farms, and a lot of us really believe in local produce for our own, we keep it local. When it comes to produce, when it comes to milk, when it comes to products that are kind of native to this area, it certainly makes sense that we produce our share or more than our share of those products. But to try to apply the same principle to wood doesn't make any sense to me. That when you are sending out these bids, I gather that any company can come in and make the bid, and the idea that the wood would be sent out to other places, to me, doesn't sound good at all. If we had a binding agreement that all the wood that was harvested would be used locally, that would be one thing. So that's one question, whether we could have a binding agreement about that, because simply to send the wood elsewhere, this is not. I lived in the Pacific Northwest for a long time. There are a lot of problems about the logging up there, but those are areas that are really designed for logging, and they produce most of the wood, whether we like it or not. This is not an area for logging. So that's one question I have. But beyond that, I wanted to ask, what would be your expectation for what the city would earn from this project in terms of the timber sales, and how would that work, and also in relation to grants that you've received for this project? Would the money from the timber sales go first to the DCR and then be distributed by the DCR, a portion of which would go to the city of North Adams? Or so just a sense of how much the city will earn, how much is it a financial incentive, which I noticed here, unlike other places that I've read, there wasn't any mention of the timber sales being even a low priority, whereas I think in other things I've read, the timber sales were considered, an important priority, if not the highest priority. So what are those timber sales? How much would the city be expected to get? And how would that work? How would that income work, and how would it be distributed?
Portion. Thank you, Mr. Burns, for your question. When this project started, it was my understanding that there was a fact sheet that listed the income from timber sales as a high priority. As administrations change and projects change, that is not a priority. Our main priority here, my priority, the priority of the administration, is to preserve our watershed and the forest. That's our priority. How we go about it, we can differ all in the money, but the income, any income that is made, we're hoping to reinvest back into this project or the forest or into the watershed. Quite honestly, up until recently, I never had the timber piece, the timber sale income even on my radar until somebody brought it to my attention. But it isn't listed in any part of our local receipts that we're banking on making $50,000 or $100,000. But Andrew can speak to what the money part estimate looks like, but it certainly isn't a priority. Our priority is preserving the forest and the watershed.
Thank you.
I'll probably turn it to Gary for the actual numbers. I'll also apologize because the mayor did ask me to clarify that income piece in the presentation, and I left that out, I think. But I do think that there's a great opportunity to think beyond just the timber in this project. That's what this project is designed to do. But we can't, we have many goals. I talked about the context of multiple goals. But one of the things, the reality of the situation is you can't remove money from it. That's just sort of the world we live in. And there are benefits to using timber, including locking away that carbon and offsetting fossil fuel emissions from plastic, concrete, and steel. So also the income from that timber doesn't have to be a bad thing. And then I'll turn it over to Gary to talk about specific numbers, and you should probably come to the mic.
I can address one thing too.
Yeah, just go to the microphone, Lisa.
Yeah, just your comment on preference to have the wood be sold locally. The partnership would support that kind of project, and others are working on that. I'm not sure if it's possible for this project, but for example, Lever Incorporated, I know, is working on efforts like that to have more wood products stay here locally for people that would like to purchase them, and that is part of that sustainability vision that we would like to support.
What would be involved in putting that in as a requirement?
You want to speak to that, Gary?
And I think your question is a good question, and we all want to see products used locally. However, the utilization of the wood that we're talking about, there's a lot of wood, and we don't have too many mills in North Adams that are going to be able to utilize that wood. What we are recommending is that the timber is put out to bid to professionals, people who can purchase at a competitive rate. It is a resource that has value, and the resource, rather than given away, certainly we feel ought to be sold at its highest market value, with the understanding that this is not a liquidation harvest. It's not meant to be a money grab, where we were hired for the sole purpose of doing forest resiliency, timber stand improvement throughout the forest. However, fiduciary responsibility is to make sure that wood is marketed well, properly, and to people who can utilize it quickly. If you had a local guy who had a small mom and pop mill, he might be there 10 years and not be able to get the project done. So we will, when we go to put a prospectus out, we will consider the individuals that would be purchasing the wood and give them an opportunity to bid on that wood. What was the other question? Oh, the value. So we made an estimate that the net revenue, I think, was $40,000. That's the net value that would be extracted from the harvest. We don't know until we actually put it out to bid. So that's the estimate at this time.
And for a little perspective, we were quoted at around $20,000 for non-mechanical treatment of the invasive species. Mechanical will be more. So it will be easy for the city to reinvest those funds, and we also have grants to support the culvert work and the invasives work as well.
Okay, so I'd like to thank you for that. I have a quick, I'm sorry. My name is Dune Mackay. I live on Eagle Street in North Adams.
Oh, it doesn't actually magnify.
Oh.
It's just for like the TV, right?
Right.
Yeah.
I see. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Mayor Maxey, can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Okay, great. Thank you. Okay, so I'd like to start by replying to the monetary question was just asked, and then go on to my main question. So I read your operations plan that's currently on the website, dated as having been updated on August 14th, I think. Anyway, August. And looked at the monetary component. It shows expenses to the city of $64,000, income of $45,000, which means a cost to the city of $19,000 to cut trees, plant saplings in the place of the trees you just cut, remove invasive species, which, by the way, I also read your management plan, and that is quite clear that the invasive species are present only on the 2 out of the 18 plots mentioned that have been logged in the past 10 years. They were spread by logging. They would be spread by further logging to parts of the forest that do not have any significant component of invasive species. So anyway, and then back to the costs to the city will include replacing the culverts and road repair and so forth. So I'm wondering. You can't hear me? I'm sorry. Oh, okay. So I am wondering, will the city have any net monetary gain, and how much?
Well, let me clarify the numbers in the operations plan. So those numbers do not include grant funding that we have for invasive species treatment, as well as an anticipated community forest stewardship grant that would help to pay for the culverts. That culvert work is included in those numbers. So one of the changes that we're working with here is needing to find out how much the mechanical treatment will cost. And so, we have a request for a quote in for that. But the idea being that the city has committed to reinvesting those incomes into the site, and then we'll use grant funds to cover excess expenses. So I would sort of say it's neutral. Would you agree with that? No, okay, I will clarify. I will say it is neutral.
All right. And one more follow-up on that. Can I ask what the grant sources and amounts have been and are expected to be?
The grants, so there's multiple grants that we could use. None of them have been specifically paid out yet. So we have what's the actual name of your grant?
That's a U.S. Forest Service grant
We have a U.S. Forest Service grant for practice implementation that the Woodlands Partnership has and Mass Audubon is helping to administer. That will pay for invasive species treatment on a per acre basis. As we've changed the scales of this harvest, as Gary went out and marked it, and as we've responded to public comment, those numbers are changing, so I don't have an exact number now. But that will help pay for invasive species treatment, potentially some forester time. We have the opportunity to put in a community forest stewardship grant, which I've discussed with Tim, and that will help to pay for some of the culvert work. And that Forest Service grant will also help to pay for some of the enrichment planting, but not all of the costs. And then we also have the opportunity to use the Community Forest Stewardship Grant to help pay for some of the culverts and potentially some of the tree planting. So I can't give you hard and fast numbers right now, but those are the sources of funding that we're talking about. And then, of course, the timber revenue.
All right. Thank you for those answers. And now I can move on to what I was actually really wanted to say. So I attended your forestry walk am I out of time?
Yeah, but I'm going to let you go because you were cut off at our council meeting.
Oh, thank you.
I'll give you 3 more minutes.
Thank you. That's very kind. So I attended your forestry walk back in August and also the Conservation Commission meeting at that time. And I was quite impressed by the presentation, especially in the forestry walk. I thought, if this logging has to happen, this team will do a good job. But then a couple days later, it occurred to me, does this logging have to happen? This area was purchased by the city in the 1890s for the purpose of protecting our water. And it also serves as a beautiful hiking trail used by people all over the world. I have not yet been convinced that logging will improve anything. There will be erosion. There will be costs to the possible cost of dredging the reservoir in the future due to erosion that will necessarily happen for logging. I see in your plan that you say you're going to mitigate erosion to the best of your ability, but you'll also be causing it before you mitigate it. And you know, I think I'll stop there and say, Mayor Maxey, after that logging, that forestry walk, we started a petition to stop the logging plan for the reservoir forest, the Natural Reservoir Forest and the Bellows Pipe Trailhead. It has been signed by, at this point, 1,300 people. I have their signatures here. 33% of them are from the town of North Adams, city of North Adams. 60% of them live in Berkshire County. The remaining 30% are all over the world, and people from all over the world use this area for hiking and this beauty. So I would like to present this petition to you.
It's 1,318.
1,318 as of today.
Thank you.
And who would like to go next?
So I'm Jake Loeffner. I live at 1172 Notch Road in North Adams, right up by the project. And I have a question that maybe Andrew and Gary, you can ground me on it. In the last woods walk that you had, somebody brought up what sounded like a very good idea of suggesting a requirement that any equipment that was being brought in be washed before it comes in to specifically avoid the introduction of more invasive species during logging operation. But it seems like what might happen because of the weather conditions requirements and things like that is that people might be bringing equipment in and out, which would make that requirement, you know, more burdensome than if they were just going to bring it in and leave it and then leave. So two things. One, if the experts here could ground me in how important that is to have the equipment washed before it comes in, and if it is important, can we sort of get a commitment to make sure that yes, it's cleaned coming in and it's cleaned any time new equipment is brought in or reintroduced as it comes in. So I'd just like a little help understanding the importance of this.
Sure. That's a good question.
Can you go to the mic, Gary?
Yeah. Oh, it's a good question. The state that's a standard practice, especially fish and game. Everything's washed prior to arrival, inspected, and we can do the same. It would be part of the bid prospectus. And if equipment were coming and going, it would have to be documented that before they showed up, it was washed. And that's part of the contract. So it can be addressed in the bid prospectus and in the contract.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah, there we go. My name is Walt Kudnahowski. I'm from Ashfield, Mass. And I'm an owner of a 100-acre tract that has been harvested under similar conditions. And so I both know the ups and the downs of having such a harvest happen. It's on flatter land than we're looking at the Notch, for sure. I came with a number of questions. I'd like to have the opportunity to extend this conversation, which is truncated by an hour, to have an opportunity to have an exchange, because I have lots of questions, and based on this evening, I think we will have more questions based on what we've heard tonight. But I've switched all the questions I brought to 5 that I'd like to put in consecutive order. Some of them have short answers, I suspect. But has, in fact, as Gary has intimated, the plan been approved by the Conservation Commission? Simple question. For the 70 acres, this is new to me, are the 70 acres definable as a limited area on this parcel and the remaining 1,000 plus not going to be touched? Or is your harvest, as the plan suggests, extensive, going into each parcel where you have proposed management harvest? Okay, so water quality, the first primary thing mentioned. Your plan and the goals do not list water quality as one of your goals. The only thing you nicely say in your plan that you wish not to have additional erosion and will take all precautions to make sure it doesn't happen. But you don't speak to water quality in the plan or in the set of goals on the chart from the city. It's listed as non-existent.
Are you speaking to the Forest Stewardship Climate Plan or the Operations Plan?
I'm the chart with the goals.
Okay.
Yep. So water quality. Equipment. The nature of the harvest and the impact will depend on the equipment. Will you be looking at low impact equipment, and will that be a part of the specification? We of course have not seen any of the bid spec, but that will make a huge difference in terms of how much impact the equipment has on the parcel. Water quality. I think those, well, and one more. What was the last one? And Gary has said there will be a lot of trees. My guess is that you've estimated the number. I've also tried to do that. But a lot of trees, only 8 or 10 sizable trees make it onto a truck, maybe a few more on occasion. But that's a lot of trips up and down the road, so we can begin to sense the impact. My sense is that it's a lot, and in terms of the harvest, and we would like to know what the numbers are and what it's likely to be and how much truck impact will be going on to the roads. So, thank you.
Okay. I'm going to try to get to everything you got. Some of it I'm probably going to turn to Gary. The Forest Stewardship Climate Plan is approved by DCR. The operations plan is not a cutting plan. That's an important differentiation. The cutting plan is what will need to be approved by the Conservation Commission. The Conservation Commission works with DCR, and so the service forester signs off on it and sends it to the Conservation Commission.
For the ring of it, can you repeat what plan has been approved?
The Forest Stewardship Climate Plan, which is the 10-year management plan that was established in 2022. Okay, so that is what's been approved by DCR. The operations plan is something that we actually add to our projects to more clearly spell out what will happen, how it will happen, and how we can ensure the site is protected, and we can do some planning for folks like you, for the city, for the forester, for the operator. So it's something additional. The cutting plan has not yet been filed. And, you know, I think this is evidence to as to why that's the case, right? We're in discussion. And so at that point, you know, we're not there yet, basically. Your second question was speaking to the 70 acres, right? This map, that map that we had up here that shows this 70 acres.
Can you see it again, please?
Absolutely. This map that shows this 70 acres, this is what the city has made the collective decision to move forward on from their plan.
Which are the 70 acres? We can't tell.
Okay, people just asked 5 questions. Start again. What? What?
Where are the 70 acres on this map?
Well, okay, so you can see stand 1, 61 acres. Stand 2, 4.4 acres. Stand 3, 2 acres. Stand 4, 2.5 acres, and then the invasive species treatment in between. So this footprint, wherever there's a hash, is what I'm referring to, and this map is, and the reason that this is what's in the operations plan is because that's all the city has selected as what they want to move forward with from their forest stewardship climate plan.
So there's no operations going on beyond the boundaries of those 2, 3, 5 acre tracts?
The operations that will go on are everything that's within this map, and that's it.
Within the 70 acres?
No, within the 1,073 acres.
But the 1,000 isn't shown on that map.
Oh, that's correct. That's correct. This is not a map of the whole property. That's correct. I don't have it right now. We could provide it at a later time. Yeah, absolutely.
We'll add it to our frequently asked questions section.
Is the management plan on the website?
Oh, is it in your plan, Gary?
Well, I thought, yeah, it is.
Yeah, you're right.
There's
Sorry.
the goal set right there.
There you go.
It's actually in a few different sections here. All right. So that is already posted on the city's website, and you can see it. I apologize. Your third question Oh, I had that up and then I moved the page, didn't I? Water quality is ranked as high in the plan. And we've talked about water quality today. We've talked about it in the operations plan, so I'm not quite sure where your concern there stems from. But I can pull up that chart for you.
You went by it, I think.
I went by it like 3 times, didn't I?
I can't look when it's gone.
There.
Protect water quality, high. Okay?
It's listed as low.
No, that's not correct. This is high. On the left side, high. Water quality. Protect water quality, high.
Hi.
Let me zoom out. Let me zoom out for you. Well, the mayor pointed to that evolution earlier, right? This idea that the city has evolved its thinking around the focus on the income as administrations has changed. This plan was developed several years ago, and the city has made the commitment that they'll reinvest that income into the care of the forest and the reservoir. So I'm having trouble zooming out. I'm sorry. I'm not good with computers when I'm also talking.
So could we go to one
Here we
of
go.
Walter's questions about the number of trees and
I'm going to turn that to Gary.
Okay, what was the question? Which one?
Walter, you're
Wood, what are, how many trees are?
Sure. So,
Can you go to the microphone? I'm sorry, but we can't hear you at home.
okay, that's a very easy question. Every tree that has been marked has paint on it. I have a tally of every tree. I can give you that information. That's not hard to do. And as far as your question about impact, low impact harvesting equipment, there are many harvesting systems that we can utilize on woodlands in Massachusetts. Some are smaller sized equipment, some are larger sized equipment. But the most important thing is the result, is how is that equipment going to be able to move that timber without damaging your residual forest. And we talked about that in our site walk when we were on the notch, standing on a steep slope and talking about the different harvesting systems. So one harvesting system may be better than another harvesting system on a particular site slope, and we'll address that with the buyers. And the bottom line, the most important thing is that the extraction of the wood, whether it be a small or large piece of equipment, more of a high impact or low impact equipment, is that the residual forest will be the same. That's what we're looking for. And that's part of my job as your agent, to make sure that that resource is being protected in that manner. So, like I said, there's cut-to-length systems that are relatively low impact. You have mechanical harvesters, whole tree chipping, a little bit more intensive. We're not going to employ the whole tree chipper, but then you have individual hand choppers as well with wheeled skidders. And we'll look at that. We'll look at, I have had operations where you have both, where you have a forwarder on a less of a slope, and then you have to employ a skidder with wheels on the higher slopes. It's just a function of the terrain that you're working with. But the most important thing is the result, and not necessarily the size or the type of equipment. And that's our job as resource managers, is to protect that resource.
Hopefully not abusing my question, but as an extension, will the trees be felled or will they be mechanically taken down?
Potentially both, potentially one or the other, yes. Yep.
Anyone else with a
I
question,
have
Diane?
one quick question. This is shown as a demonstration project. Who's your university partner?
Well, we work with professors at UVM and UMass Amherst. And so, but ultimately, this is not a research forest. There's an important differentiation here. The idea of this demonstration site is that we're actually saying we're taking the practices that have been examined in the literature over time to be effective in addressing challenges like climate adaptation, wildlife habitat, and so on, and the protection of the site, and applying those here in a way that incorporates education. So centering education around these practices and how we can care for the forest well so that others can learn from this is the key aspect of demonstration here. So it's not an experimental forest. That is a different thing. Additionally, that monitoring component that I referred to is the other aspect of demonstration, that we're actually collecting data across this forest to understand the change over time and to make sure that it works, and perhaps most importantly, as climate change unfolds, so that we can care for the forest adaptively. We can understand how change is occurring as climate change occurs. Yes?
If this is not an experimental forest.
Jen, excuse me, can we just have you have the microphone
Absolutely.
so we can hear you on TV? Thank you.
So if this is not an experimental forest, yet a demonstration forest, as I've heard stated multiple times tonight, can someone please explain to me how many demonstration forests this organization has created to date and what the outcomes of that has been? And secondly, I just have a question for the administration. If they could please share with us why we do not have a representative on the partnership since Mr. Fury left, which has been prior to this administration taking place, and we don't have a seat at the table for the organization that's making these decisions for us.
Andrew Fitch is your representative at the Woodlands Park.
No, he's letters.
Okay, I'm sorry, I retract that.
Andrew Fitch is the representative from Lever Incorporated. So we have been hoping that we would get a North Adams representative. So if anyone's interested, Mayor Maxey.
Yeah, if
Yeah.
anyone is interested, please email us. We haven't been able, we've asked a couple of people, some of which are in the room tonight, and we haven't had anyone, but if someone is interested, please reach out.
So to answer your question, this forest is the furthest along of our network, but we're working on demonstrations across the state, a total of five demonstration sites across the state.
So to simplify it down, the answer is none. This whole project concept is first.
Well, there are demonstration forests across the world.
But what the first for you?
Yes, that's correct. But we all have been engaging in forest stewardship for decades across our team.
Okay. You want it after me? Okay. Hello, my name is Michaela LaPointe. I'm from 35 Versailles Ave in North Adams. Mayor, we had tough Professor Bill Muma, a 2007 Nobel Peace Prize winner, able to speak with you, but you ignored us. So I'm just wondering why you have ignored us for a month. And you listened to Gary, whose background has been working with a company in Maine to take wood products to turn into stuffing for boxes across the sea. And before that, he worked with an organization that was private for tree farming. So that's one question I have for you. And so I also really don't know if I can trust him when it comes to working for what's best for the citizens and the residents of North Adams. Andy mentioned the spread of invasive species, but there are only 2 spots which was logged in 10 years, like my friend mentioned, and in the 18 spots you want to log. Andy said 40% of the trees have been dying, but at the walkthrough we were told 30%. I'm just curious how it jumped so like 10% in a month. Also at the walkthrough, Gary said that he wanted to ask for more land that was at the base of Bellows. I just wanted to know if you actually got that approval. And then we might have a partnership, but my friend here already talked about that, so I'm not going to ask that question. And as a resident, I will not be clapping for the city's work on this project. This is a project that should have been made more transparent with the residents, and it was not. There was only 1 meeting in 2022 to address this, and if I had known about it then, I would have been there. We pay taxes, and we should actually have gotten a say about something that is happening near our water source, especially if Gary admitted at the walkthrough that this is an experiment. And I'm not okay with that.
Well,
you.
this is not an experiment.
Gary said that at the walkthrough, so I don't know how he wants to explain.
Okay, well, we'll follow up on that. So one of the things I want to touch on is Bill Muma. I recognize that Bill Muma's perspective is valued by many in this group. In the Ashfield newsletter, most recently promoting Bill Muma's talk on September 14th, Bill Muma stated, Muma suggests two types of forests, production forests and planetary operation forests. The production forest would continue to produce forest products using improved climate-smart management strategies. Planetary operation forests would be selected as those holding the greatest amount of carbon in their trees and soils and protected for that purpose. It may be necessary to manage some of them to make them less vulnerable to disruption because of previous management practices. This is proforestation management. So that's a quote from Bill Muma, which advocates for a diversity of approaches to forest stewardship.
Thank you for sharing that. However, when we talked to him and he looked at the plan, because this is a watershed should be protected at all costs. That is what he's against. And I feel that it's awful that we were not allowed by the mayor to have a meeting in the past month to get another perspective other than yours, who you work for logging companies.
Well, I don't work for a logging company, to be clear.
Or other organizations that you're working with do, unfortunately.
And I also understand that I understand where a hesitation may come from, right? There's concern. You care about the forest. I care about the forest.
If you did, you wouldn't be doing this project, sir. But continue with your answer.
So I think I'm going to move on. One thing I do want to point to is the idea that stand 3A that I talked about, where that has not been harvested, I believe you said 18 years. Okay, 10 years. That has not been harvested. That area has not been harvested in over 40 years, if I'm not mistaken. And that photo that I showed actually shows that dynamic playing out, that plantation was there and those invasive species took over. So there's not necessarily this direct association with just because an invasive species is there, it meant that a harvest recently happened. Does anyone else want to follow up?
So, Michaela, I just don't want you to think that you have been ignored. We've been reading all of the emails that have come in, and as far as, the doctor, we wanted to get through this. We wanted to hear all of the things, and we would talk about whether we were going to invite him in or not. So,
If you have not been ignoring us, why haven't you answered at least one of the emails?
well, because we wanted to get through this meeting, gather all of the information, and then go from there. Well, I'm sorry if you felt like that, but I'd be happy to talk to you about that after. Okay, anyone with any question? Yes.
Hi, my name is Deborah Schneer, and I live at 48 Holbrook Street in North Adams. I'm not clear about the status of the permits and the cutting plan. I'm not sure about the relationship between them, whether or not the permits have been approved, the cutting plan has been submitted. I don't understand. Could you please clarify that and speak as if you're talking to someone in third grade?
Absolutely. So the cutting plan will be submitted. It has not yet been submitted. And so that cutting plan will be submitted. That will need to be approved by DCR and it'll be sent to the Conservation Commission. There will be additional approval needed for the culvert work from the Conservation Commission. We'll set up a meeting in the near future to get those approvals. There is also the need for, since we're using federal funding, endangered species permitting, and it's a best practice either way. On this property, that is the long-eared bat. And so that is something that is in the process right now, but has not been fully approved, but is expected to be approved.
Okay, so there is no permit to date.
Well, I think what I'm saying is I'm working on the permits as the project unfolds.
But it hasn't been approved.
That's correct. But one of the caveats here being that I can't submit the final endangered species permitting until we have the final layout of the harvest.
Okay.
And so as we've discussed, we've been adjusting as we work with you all.
Okay. Another question. You said
Please
that.
don't rush because I'm giving you extra time because you got cut off the other night.
Why, thank you.
I tried to get you more time.
Okay, thank you. You mentioned the herbicides, that you will not be using herbicides at the reservoir,
Correct.
correct?
That's correct.
Now, we're not talking just about the reservoir, we're talking about the forest. So will you be using herbicides elsewhere?
It's an important clarification. Nowhere on the 1,073 acres will we be using herbicide.
Ever?
I don't know. For this project, no.
Because I know you're going to be monitoring it for years to come, right?
Yes, and so ultimately on this trajectory, that would be the mechanical treatment.
So in those 1,000 acres, no herbicides.
Correct.
That's correct.
Glad to hear that. Okay, thank you. Since a portion of the forest is in Adams, have you notified the town? And also, similarly, my understanding is Williamstown uses North Adams water. Have they been notified?
Everyone has been invited to the public forums. The operation is happening on North Adams land.
But they're abutters, aren't they? Aren't abutters supposed to be notified?
If you're within 200 feet.
Correct.
If you're within 200 feet?
That's correct.
So they haven't been notified.
Of the operation.
I don't know how that applies to water. If they use our water, have they been notified that they'll be using the water that may be affected by this project because it's on a wetland, because of the heavy equipment that's being brought in and so on and so forth? Isn't that a important thing?
I understand your concern. We haven't directly notified them.
Okay.
And yet this operation will have very little impact on the water itself.
Okay, thank you. And I had another question. Okay, I guess I will pass it on. Oh, can you tell us of a similar pilot project on a steep reservoir mixed forest land that you would point to as a successful model? And what have your follow-up studies revealed?
I do. So the question about watershed management came up, and I manage several municipalities that own large watersheds, City of Leominster, City of Haverhill, and there are, and you also have to look at the Quabbin Reservoir, huge municipal water supply. And they're being managed. And they're being managed for a purpose. And some may not agree with the outcome or the approach, but I think there's some good case studies that you ought to look into. Go to the Quabbin Reservoir Management Plan. Go to some of these municipalities that are actively managing their land. And the purpose is, it's for the purpose of protecting that resource. Many of the watersheds in the past have been plastered with plantations that are in decline. They do have potential impacts if you're not managing the land. So diversity and protection of the resource involves properly managing them. And the idea is the steps that we're taking here are now going above and beyond traditional forestry. So take a look at a few case studies. And Quabbin, sure, and see what's happening there. You're not the only reservoir watershed that is actively involved with forest management.
I got one more question for you, Gary.
Sure.
What's it going to look like when you're done?
Okay, that's a good
Like,
question, right?
There for, say, 3 months,
Yeah.
cutting the trees in there with those skids. I'm learning new words like
Yeah.
skids
So,
and embankments and, what's it going to look like after you cut down those trees?
okay, so that's a great question, and it's kind of like viewing art. Some people love Van Gogh, and some don't. You're going to look at it, and I'm going to look at it and say, that looks great. I love it. I love what's happened here. And others are going to look at it and say, this is a change that I don't like. I don't like the look of it.
Why do you think we might not like the look of it?
Because you're not used to it, maybe, and it's a change. I think a lot of people, it's emotional. Forestry is emotional. If you're not associated with it every day and can see the results and don't know what what's going to happen down the road.
Okay, let me
Yeah.
ask it differently. Some people would see it as beautiful, some people would see it as not beautiful or
Sure.
terrible. Physically, what's it going to look like if you took a picture of it? Could you
Okay.
describe it?
Well, probably the best way to answer that is let's take some photos and of other projects and send them to you. Let's go take a look at some projects that have been done. And
Actually, I've seen the Quabbin, and it looks like a wasteland.
yeah, well, that's, again, I think if I looked at the same picture, I'd have a totally different perspective.
Right.
What I would also,
Okay.
what also may be helpful in terms of setting that expectation, I don't know if you've looked through the city's webpage on the demonstration site, but we did include a what does it look like section, and it's like a description of literally what will happen, and so it does set some expectation there. And I'm the first to admit that this will change the forest, just like I talked about before, that aesthetic impact, right? But the idea is that on 1,073 acres, we've said these 70 acres are in the most need of care, and we're going to care for those forests for future generations.
Okay, one more question. On that chart there, at the bottom, it says something about development. It says not applicable, right? Something about
Yeah, it's
developing.
city-owned land.
City-owned land, not applicable. Are there plans for developing that?
Not in the watershed, no.
Did you want to add?
One more thing I'd like just to say about expectations. Because forestry is a long-term prospect, and initially you have these impacts that, maybe they don't look good. But then one of the things I like to do is take a client, a prospective client, to a project that's happening, one that we're working on, and then go look at one that we did 10, 15 years ago. And people's expectations can change if they're not as used to seeing these types of land management activities. So I would say try to educate yourself by going to see some of the projects that might be going on in your neighborhood. Ask if State Forester, if there's something that's available for the public to take a look at. They're all different. They all have different landowners, different objectives. But yeah, that's my.
We have one more comment from over here, and then we'll go to Mrs. Jowett. And just keep in mind, we want to end at 7:45.
I just think when you ask, what does it look like? There's what does it look like to you, and then there's what does it look like to a neotropical warbler that's flown all the way from South America, and what looks good to you and what looks good to that neotropical warbler can be very different, and what you don't like, it does like. So you just don't think that our sort of human image is what all the other critters in the woods think.
So the critters in the woods are going to like it?
Yeah.
Very good.
Okay,
I
we're
mean,
gonna.
ask the Audubon people.
We'll go to. We
there's
got
a
two
whole
more
thing.
questions. We're gonna go to three more questions, Mrs. Jowett, and then we'll go back towards the third row.
I didn't plan on speaking tonight. Hulda Jowett, 1101 Massachusetts Avenue. I think several people here are most concerned about what's going to happen to the Bellows Pipe Trail, which is a historic trail dating back with Ralph Waldo Emerson, and famous people have hiked it. It's a beautiful trail, and it is going to be, from what I can see, very much affected by what the plan is to and I just feel that one of the things that that we have in North Adams is some of the most beautiful country in all of the United States, quite honestly. People come here and they're amazed. And they come here and they hike. I live on the Appalachian Trail. People hike. They hike on top of the Hoosick Trail, up on the Mohawk Trail. They hike the Appalachian Trail. They hike the Bellows Pipe. I hike the Bellows Pipe. Some of the people here hike it. And it's historic. There's a cemetery up there. The Wilbur Farm, all of the stonework from the Wilbur Farms is still in the woods up there. And I don't think we want to destroy something that actually brings people to this community.
Thank you, Mrs. Dow.
Hi, my name is Jen Albertine, and I'm the Climate Change and Land Justice Director for the Mount Grace Land Conservation Trust. We operate in the Quabbin, and I can tell you that prior to the harvesting that happened in the Quabbin, it was red pine that was dying, and it looked awful. There was no biodiversity, there was no undergrowth, and since the harvest that have occurred, there is wonderful biodiversity coming back, including trees, understory, medicinal plants, all kinds of things. The wildlife loves it, but I didn't come here to talk about that tonight. I came here to talk about the illusion of preservation. So I live in a wood house. I don't know about the rest of you. Okay, turn the lights on. Okay, turn them all on.
Fine. We need to stay away.
Put a light on here. I live in a wood house. I know that the wood that I bought from Home Depot did not arrive there from the wood fairy. It came from a harvest somewhere. And so here in Massachusetts, we can tote that we have beautiful, intact forests, but we are extracting those resources from other communities. And there's a great report that just came out called the Beyond the Illusion of Preservation. 80% of our wood comes from Maine. Maine is getting over-harvested. They're having trouble with their carbon stocks. We have a moral responsibility, and 80% of the wood is consumed in southern New England, and Massachusetts is the highest consumer of that. More than 50% of the 80% is Massachusetts. And we are the smallest producer of any wood products. And so we have an ethical and moral responsibility in the face of climate change to produce our own wood here on site. And so yes, sometimes it looks awful when we harvest a woodlot, but you know what comes back is diversity and beautiful, and we are contributing to having a better impact on the climate in all of our lives. So we need to take that into account. We can't be NIMBYs and harvest and extract for somebody else's community while we all live in wood houses.
My name is Andre Strong Bearheart from the Nipmuc tribe. I serve as a cultural steward, but I'm just here on behalf of speaking for the things that don't have two legs here. That's what we did here for thousands of years. We spoke for our relatives. I keep hearing about, cuts and what it means for folks in their viewing when a cut happens, or how folks relate to what the health of the earth is. Aki, we have stories about this. We've been here for thousands of years. My question is to people, do you think that just for the past couple hundred years that it's been happening here, is it DCR's fault, or it seems to me that these people here are trying to move forward in a healthier way of the way that conservation has happened here for just the past couple hundred years? Do you agree with that? Do you agree that the conservation commissions had to happen not because of my people that were here for thousands of years, but because of the people that were clearing the land here? Okay? And so it's actually the ancestors and the forefathers of the people that are sitting right in this room at the moment that just for the past couple hundred years, you say you want to stand and fight for these trees that are here right now, but these weren't the trees that were here when my ancestors walked here. And right now, we're in Stockbridge, Muncie territory, which is my sister tribe. And so I only speak as an individual here, because tribal protocol, I won't speak for them. But I will speak for the land, because the land can't voice in this way. And so there's a lot of ways that land stewardship through an indigenous viewpoint is going to help you realize that there's a whole different mindset in what beautiful looks like. And sure, I heard the statement say, well, what will it look like? Well, what did it look like 300 years ago? What did it look like 400 years ago? That was not that long ago. We have stories, we have ancestral ways of being, songs that are 10, 12,000 years old. We bury ancestors that are 3,000, 4,000 years old, still to this day. And so I think that it's really important that if you're speaking for the land, and you're speaking for the land, I agree. If you're going to do a cut, then indigenous people need to come onto the land. There needs to be an absolute view set and a mindset with indigenous folks about why we would cut this land. What sort of relationship do we have with this land? What can this timber be used for when it comes to, just like Jen was saying, are we extracting from other tribal territories to build our homes here so that your next generations can have a home here? Are we doing that, or are we using this wood right here to create more health in this space and then using that land to give your next generations? What is it? You know, you need to look at the bigger picture, and for some reason, most people look at their lifetime as the most significant thing here. That you want to see the beauty in your lifetime. But I'm here to tell you that the way that we stewarded the land for thousands of years here was the knowledge and teachings from the 7 generations before us into the 7 generations after us. And so it's really important that you really tap into the local indigenous knowledge, and that you don't try to speak for your forefathers, the ones who actually clear cut all of the trees here. And so I'm going to just let everybody in the room on both sides sit with that. Because on both sides, it's going to take both of you to come into an agreement about what that means. Health for the land. Health in this way. And so I know that Mass Audubon because I've actually done a walk as an indigenous land steward. I work alongside folks like Mount Grace. And even before a cut happens, we do a walk on the land. What medicinals? Has anybody actually also done a cultural inventory report on the land? Do you know what's on the land? A lot of land trusts and peoples on the lands are only concerned about the trails. But what's below the trails? What about the medicinals? What about the food systems? What's happening with the animals and the water? Absolutely, the NIPI, the health of the water. What does your viewpoint of health of the water consists of compared to what my viewpoint of the health of the water consists of? And I will say that Mass Audubon has brought us into these discussions, and they've asked for help in a viewpoint about what that could possibly mean. And it sounds like to me that there hasn't been a cut here yet, correct? And so I see people really upset and really churned up. But I think that this is what's happening here right now. I think that there's already being a place and a stage set for people to voice these things, but it needs to be in a good way. There's no way that fighting with each other is going to be the answer for health in the future. And I would definitely voice that the Stockbridge Munsee or that the local indigenous tribe here be, because is anybody here from that tribe? Okay. Well, we're still here. We're still alive. Why are they not here voicing? And so if you guys are fighting that fight, why haven't you invited them?
We have reached out to people, and they have not reached
The tribe, not the council that sits on this table. I'm talking about the people. It got incorporated in 1895, a couple hundred years ago. It was illegal for us to even have our ceremonies until 1978, the Religious Freedom Act. In 2002, it was still illegal for us to walk inside the city limits without being accompanied by a musketeer who would be killed. Why have you not tapped in and reached out to the local indigenous tribe about the way we stewarded the land for thousands of years here? That's all I'd like to say here.
Thank you.
And I'd like to thank you all for coming tonight. We're going to take all of this information, all this dialogue under advisement. We will certainly, if you have not signed in, please sign in so we have your email addresses. So as we move forward with this project, we can communicate with you better. Thank you all so much. Have a good evening. And I'm sorry we ran over, but I wanted to give you your hour.